Ada Pressley knelt at the edge of the stone trough, dipped her hand into the water, and brought it to her mouth. The water was cold, so cold it made her teeth ache, and it tasted of nothing. No iron, no sulfur, no bitterness, just clean, mineral-sweet mountain water flowing up through 3 feet of ancient limestone the way it had been flowing for 1,000 years before anyone built a springhouse over it. She swallowed, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and looked around at the dark stone interior of the building everyone in Decker Hollow had told her would make her sick. Welcome back to the Hollow. Get comfortable, settle in, and leave a comment to tell us where you're listening from tonight. Because what Ada Pressley is about to find in this springhouse is going to unravel a lie that has kept an entire hollow under one man's control for over 20 years. Ada was 31 years old, and she had arrived in Decker Hollow 6 weeks ago carrying a leather medical bag, a box of dried herbs packed in straw, and a letter of introduction from the Frontier Nursing Service in Wendover. She was a trained midwife and herbalist, one of the mountain women who traveled from hollow to hollow on horseback, delivering babies, setting bones, and treating fevers with willow bark tea and poultices when no doctor could be found within 30 miles. But Decker Hollow already had a doctor. Dr. Eldon Pace had operated the only medical practice in the Hollow for 23 years. He ran it out of a 2-story clapboard house at the lower end of the road, and he was the only person within a day's ride who could write a prescription, set a compound fracture, or sign a birth certificate. The coal company paid him a retainer to treat miners' injuries, and every family in the Hollow owed him something: a tab at his office, a payment plan for a difficult birth, a debt for the time he treated a child's pneumonia through 3 long February nights. Ada's letter of introduction was addressed to the county health board. It certified her as a licensed midwife and herbalist, authorized to practice in any county in eastern Kentucky. She had presented it to Dr. Pace on her first morning in the Hollow. As a professional courtesy, Dr. Pace had read the letter, folded it carefully, and handed it back to her with a smile that showed too many teeth. "Miss Pressley," he had said, "I welcome any assistance in caring for this community. But I should tell you that the families here are accustomed to modern medical treatment. The old ways, the herbs, the teas, the poultices, they have their place, certainly. But we've moved past that. I hope you understand." Ada had understood perfectly. Dr. Pace did not want her here. She set up her practice anyway in a small rented room above the general store. She hung dried herbs from the ceiling beams, boneset for fever, slippery elm for coughs, black cohosh for women's troubles, wild cherry bark for chest congestion. She laid out her instruments on a clean cloth: forceps, scissors, a stethoscope she had earned through 2 years of training, and a set of glass medicine bottles she filled herself from tinctures she made by hand. The families came slowly. A woman with a cough that Dr. Pace's syrup hadn't touched, a child with an earache, an old man whose rheumatism flared every time the weather turned. Ada treated them with what she knew, what the mountain women had known for 200 years before any doctor arrived with a leather bag and a diploma. Willow bark for pain, comfrey root for swelling, chamomile for sleeplessness, elderberry for the chest. The treatments worked. Word spread. More families came, and Ada needed a springhouse. The herbs she gathered had to be dried, stored, and kept cool. Tinctures needed cold storage to maintain their potency. A springhouse, a small stone building built directly over a natural spring, where the constant flow of cold water kept the temperature near 40 degrees year-round, was the mountain equivalent of an icebox. Every hollow in Appalachia had at least one. Decker Hollow had one too. It sat at the upper end of the hollow, where Decker Creek emerged from a limestone cliff face. The building was roughly 10 feet square, built of the same gray limestone as the cliff itself, with a heavy slate roof and a single oak door secured by a wooden bar. It was old, older than any cabin in the hollow. The stonework was dry-laid, without mortar, fitted so precisely that the joints were hairline thin. A stone trough ran through the interior, carrying the spring water from where it emerged at the back wall to where it flowed out through a channel beneath the front door and joined the creek. It was beautiful, it was functional, and nobody in Decker Hollow would go near it. "That spring's poisoned," said Della Sismore, the woman who ran the general store when Ada asked about it. "Has been since before I was born. My grandmother said the water turned bad around 1920. 3 families that drank from it got sick. Fevers, stomach pains. The whole hollow was laid out for weeks. Dr. Pace's father treated them. After that, nobody touched the spring. The springhouse has been shut ever since." "What kind of poison?" Ada asked. "Mineral poison, they say. Something in the limestone. Dr. Pace says the rock formation shifted and released something toxic into the water table. It looks clean, but it'll make you sick as a dog." Ada looked at the springhouse from the road. The stone walls were solid. The slate roof showed no damage. The wooden door was weathered but intact. A small stream of perfectly clear water flowed out from beneath the door and joined the creek, which every family in the hollow drank from downstream. That was the detail that stopped her. If the spring water was poisoned, and the spring fed directly into Decker Creek, then every family downstream was drinking poisoned water every day. But nobody downstream was sick. The only people who had reportedly gotten sick were the 3 families who drank directly from the springhouse. 23 years ago. That night, Ada sat in her room above the general store, studying a geological survey map of the county she had borrowed from the county clerk's office. The map showed the underground water formations in the region. Decker Creek's headwaters came from a limestone aquifer, the same formation that fed springs across the entire county. Limestone springs were among the cleanest natural water sources in the world. The limestone itself acted as a natural filter, removing impurities as the water passed through millions of years of compacted stone. A limestone spring didn't just turn bad. The geology didn't work that way. Before we get into what Ada found inside that springhouse, take a second to hit that like button if you're the kind of person who questions the stories you've been told. It really helps these Appalachian stories reach more listeners. Now, let's go back to the spring. The next morning, before dawn, Ada walked up the hollow road to the springhouse. She carried her medical bag, a clean glass jar, and a kerosene lantern. The wooden bar across the door was heavy but not locked. She lifted it, set it aside, and pushed the door open. The interior was dark, cool, and damp. Her lantern light fell on the stone trough, a channel roughly 18 inches wide and 12 inches deep, cut directly into the limestone floor. Crystal clear water flowed through it steadily, entering from a fissure in the back wall where the spring emerged from the cliff face. The water was so clear she could see individual grains of sand on the trough bottom. The air smelled of wet stone and cold water. Nothing else. No sulfur, no rot, no chemical tang. She knelt at the trough, dipped her clean glass jar into the water, held it up to the lantern light, and examined it. The water was perfectly transparent. No sediment, no discoloration, no particulate matter of any kind. She drank from the jar. The water was the cleanest, sweetest water she had ever tasted. Ada set the jar down and began to examine the springhouse more carefully. The stone walls were solid. The trough was uncontaminated. The spring flow was strong and steady. This was not a poisoned water source. This was one of the finest natural springs she had ever seen. Then she noticed the shelf. Along the back wall, above the spring fissure, someone had built a narrow stone shelf into the wall, a ledge of flat limestone, roughly 4 feet long and 8 inches deep. On the shelf, covered in dust and cobwebs, sat a row of objects she hadn't expected to find in an abandoned springhouse. Glass bottles, dozens of them. Small brown medicine bottles with cork stoppers, arranged in neat rows. Each bottle had a handwritten paper label, yellowed with age but still legible. Ada picked up the nearest bottle, blew the dust off the label, and read it. Willow bark tincture, prepared by Ada Pressley, herbalist, Decker Hollow, 1919. Ada's hand began to shake. Ada Pressley, her grandmother's name. Ada sat on the cold stone floor of the springhouse with the bottles arranged in front of her, reading each label by lantern light. Willow bark tincture for pain, elderberry syrup for chest congestion, boneset tea concentrate for fever, black cohosh for women's troubles, wild ginger for stomach ailments, comfrey root salve for wounds, slippery elm paste for burns, golden seal wash for infection. Every bottle was labeled in the same careful handwriting. Prepared by Ada Pressley, herbalist, Decker Hollow. The dates ranged from 1917 to 1920. 23 years' worth of medicine, stored on a stone shelf in a springhouse whose constant 40-degree temperature had preserved them perfectly. Ada had known her grandmother Cora only from family stories. Cora had been a mountain healer, one of the last of the old herbalist women who carried their knowledge from generation to generation, mother to daughter, going back to the Scots-Irish settlers who had first arrived in these mountains in the 1700s. The family said Cora had left Decker Hollow suddenly in 1920 and never returned. Nobody knew why. Nobody talked about it. Ada's mother had inherited Cora's leather medical bag, the same bag Ada now carried, but not her reasons for leaving. Now Ada was beginning to understand. Behind the row of medicine bottles, pushed to the back of the shelf, Ada found a small leather journal. It was water-stained but intact, preserved by the cool, dry conditions of the springhouse. She opened it carefully. The first page read, "The Practice Journal of Ada Pressley, midwife and herbalist, Decker Hollow, Kentucky. Begun January 1917. The journal was a record of every patient Cora had treated, every medicine she had prepared, and every birth she had attended. It was meticulous. Dates, symptoms, treatments, outcomes. Cora had been thorough, scientific in her own way, recording what worked and what didn't with the honesty of a woman who took her responsibilities seriously. Then, in September 1919, the tone of the journal changed. September 14, 1919, Dr. Pace Sr. has told the families that my medicines are dangerous. He claims the herbs are unregulated and could cause harm. He has told 3 families that I poisoned their children with my elderberry syrup. The children had influenza. I treated them with elderberry and boneset tea. All 3 recovered. Dr. Pace treated 4 other children in the hollow with his medicines. 2 of those 4 did not recover. Yet I am the one he accuses. Ada turned the page, October 2, 1919. Dr. Pace has begun telling families that the springhouse water is contaminated. He says the spring has been poisoned by a mineral deposit and that anyone who drinks from it will fall ill. This is a lie. I have drunk from this spring every day for 11 years. The water is clean. But I store my medicines here because the cold preserves them. If people believe the spring is poisoned, they will not come to the springhouse. If they do not come to the springhouse, they will not see my medicines. If they do not see my medicines, They will have no choice but to buy his. November 15, 1919, 3 families have fallen sick. The symptoms are stomach cramps, fever, and nausea. Dr. Pace is treating them. He says the illness proves the spring is poisoned. I do not believe this. The sickness began after these families received medicines from Dr. Pace, the same tonic he has been prescribing for everything from headaches to childbirth pains. I asked the Sizemore family what was in the tonic. They showed me the bottle. It contains calomel, mercury chloride. Mercury chloride causes stomach cramps, fever, and nausea. The families are not sick from the spring. They are sick from his medicine. Ada closed the journal. She sat in the silence of the springhouse, the lantern flickering, the spring water flowing steadily through the stone trough, and understood the full architecture of the lie. Dr. Pace Sr., the father of the current Dr. Pace, had poisoned his own patients with mercury-based medicine, blamed the illness on the springhouse, and used the manufactured fear to drive Cora Pressley out of the hollow. With Cora gone and the springhouse declared poisonous, no alternative healer could establish a practice. The Pace family had held a medical monopoly over Decker Hollow for 23 years, and the foundation of that monopoly was a lie about a spring. And now the son was running the same operation the father had built. Ada wrapped the journal in her shawl, gathered 3 of the medicine bottles as evidence, and left the springhouse. She barred the door behind her and walked back down the hollow road in the thin morning light. She needed to be careful. Cora's journal was powerful evidence, but it was also 23 years old. Dr. Pace Jr. could dismiss it as the ravings of a bitter rival. Ada needed current proof that the spring was clean and that Dr. Pace's current practices were harmful. She started with the water. She filled 3 clean glass jars from the springhouse, labeled them with date and location, and drove them to the county health office in town. She requested a formal water quality analysis, a test that would measure mineral content, bacterial contamination, and the presence of any toxic substances. The county health officer, a tired man named Greer, who clearly processed these requests by rote, told her the results would take 2 weeks. Then she started visiting families. She went to every cabin in the hollow, one by one, and asked a simple question: "What medicines does Dr. Pace prescribe for you?" She didn't challenge the doctor. She didn't share Cora's journal. She simply listened and took notes. The answers formed a pattern so consistent it was almost mathematical. Dr. Pace prescribed 3 medicines for virtually every ailment: a brown tonic for pain and fever, a white powder for stomach complaints, and a thick syrup for coughs. The tonic cost 50 cents a bottle. The powder cost 75 cents. The syrup cost $1. Every family in the hollow was buying at least one of these medicines regularly, and most were buying all 3. Ada examined the tonic first. A mother named Beulah Combs let her look at the bottle. The label read, "Dr. Pace's Restorative Tonic for General Health and Vigor." There was no ingredient list. Ada uncorked the bottle and smelled it. Alcohol, strong, cheap grain alcohol, and something sharp and metallic underneath. She didn't need a laboratory to identify it. She had been trained to recognize it. The metallic smell was calomel, mercurous chloride, the same compound Cora had identified 23 years ago. It was a purgative that had been widely used in the 1800s but abandoned by legitimate medicine decades ago because of its toxicity. Taken regularly, it caused stomach cramps, nausea, loose teeth, tremors, and kidney damage. Dr. Pace was selling mercury to his patients and calling it medicine. And the families, who had no alternative healer and no access to a pharmacy within 30 miles, had been buying it for 23 years. Ada did not confront Dr. Pace directly. She had watched her grandmother make that mistake, challenging the doctor openly, alone, without proof that the community would accept. Cora had been driven out. Ada would not be. Instead, she did three things simultaneously. First, she reopened the springhouse. She went up the hollow road on a Saturday morning with a bucket, a scrub brush, and a broom. She swept the slate floor, cleaned the stone trough, scrubbed 23 years of cobwebs off the walls, and propped the door open so the morning light could reach the interior. She set Cora's medicine bottles in neat rows on the stone shelf, cleaned, relabeled in her own handwriting, the original labels preserved beneath. Then she began making medicines. She gathered herbs from the mountainsides the way Cora had taught. Her mother and her mother had taught her. Willow bark from the creek, willows, elderberry from the bushes along the road, boneset from the wet meadow above the hollow. She dried them on racks inside the springhouse, prepared tinctures and teas, and stored them in clean glass bottles on the stone shelf, using the spring's constant cold to keep them potent. The first family to come was Pearl Amberjay, a young mother whose infant had a persistent cough that Dr. Pace's thick syrup had not improved. Ada gave her a bottle of wild cherry bark syrup, the same recipe Cora had used, and told her to give the baby a teaspoon every 4 hours. The baby's cough cleared in 2 days. Pearl told her sister. Her sister told a neighbor. Within a week, families were walking up the hollow road to the springhouse the way they had walked to Ada Pressley 23 years ago. Second, Ada began documenting. She kept a meticulous journal, modeled on Cora's, recording every patient she treated, every medicine she prescribed, and the outcome. She also recorded, with the patient's permission, the symptoms they had been experiencing while taking Dr. Pace's medicines: stomach cramps, nausea, loose teeth in 2 elderly patients, tremors in a miner's hands that his wife said had started after he began taking the brown tonic for back pain. The symptoms were consistent across every family. They were textbook calomel poisoning. Third, and this was the step that required patience, Ada wrote to the Kentucky State Board of Medical Examiners. She did not accuse Dr. Pace of malpractice. She simply requested that the board send an inspector to review the medical practices in Decker Hollow, citing concerns about the composition of locally compounded medicines. She included a sealed sample of Dr. Pace's brown tonic, obtained from Beulah Combs, and requested chemical analysis. Then she waited. Dr. Pace found out about the springhouse on a Wednesday. He appeared at the springhouse door late in the afternoon when Ada was inside preparing a batch of comfrey salve. She heard his shoes on the stone step, leather-soled, distinctive, the only man in the hollow who wore shoes that clicked, and looked up. Dr. Eldon Pace Jr. was 48 years old, built like his father's reputation, upright, precise, with silver-rimmed spectacles and a black medical bag he carried like a badge of office. His face was narrow and controlled, the kind of face that had learned to arrange itself into expressions of concern that never quite reached his eyes. "Miss Pressley," he said, standing in the doorway, not entering. "I see you've opened the springhouse." "I have," Ada said, continuing to work the salve with a wooden pestle. "I'm sure you mean well, but I must remind you that this spring was declared contaminated 23 years ago. I have medical records documenting the illness it caused. 3 families. Severe gastric distress." "I remember," Ada said. "Your father treated those families with calomel, mercury chloride. The gastric distress came from the treatment, not the water." The silence that followed lasted 5 full seconds. Ada counted them. "That is a serious accusation," Dr. Pace said. His voice hadn't changed pitch, but something behind it had tightened, the sound of a rope being pulled taut. "It's not an accusation," Ada said. "It's a medical observation. I have Cora Pressley's practice journal. She documented the same conclusion in 1919. "Cora Pressley," Dr. Pace said, and now his voice did change. A flicker of something old and inherited crossing his face, was an unlicensed practitioner who endangered this community with folk remedies. My father removed her from practice for the safety of these families. Your father drove her out of the hollow so he could sell mercury to people who trusted him," Ada said. She set down the pestle and looked at him directly. "And you've been doing the same thing for 23 years. Dr. Pace stared at her. Behind him, the late afternoon light fell across the hollow road, and in the distance, a family was walking up the path toward the springhouse, a mother carrying a child on her hip. "I will be filing a complaint with the county health board," Dr. Pace said. "This springhouse is a contaminated site. You are putting families at risk." "The county health office already has my water samples," Ada said. "They'll have the analysis results in 10 days. If the water is contaminated, I'll close the springhouse myself. If it's clean, and we both know it's clean, then I believe the county will have some questions about why it was declared poisonous in the first place." Dr. Pace looked at the approaching family, then back at Ada, then at the rows of medicine bottles on the stone shelf behind her. He turned and walked down the hollow road without another word. That night, Ada heard someone outside the springhouse. She was sleeping in her room above the general store, but old Virgil Ambergy, Pearl's father-in-law, a retired miner who had volunteered to keep an eye on the springhouse at night, came banging on her door at midnight. "Someone tried to dump something in the spring," Virgil said, breathing hard from running. "I was sitting on the wall and I heard glass breaking inside. By the time I got the door open, they were gone up the ridge. But they left this." He held up a broken brown glass bottle. The smell coming from it was sharp and acrid, unmistakable lye. Someone had tried to dump lye into the springhouse trough, which would have turned the clean water caustic and confirmed every lie about the spring being poisoned. Ada looked at the bottle. She looked at Virgil, and she understood that she was no longer dealing with a professional disagreement. She was dealing with a man who would rather poison a spring than lose his monopoly. "Did you save the water?" she asked. "Trough is clean," Virgil said. "The bottle broke on the floor stones, not in the water. Whoever threw it had poor aim in the dark." Ada picked up the broken bottle with a cloth, wrapped it carefully, and placed it in her medical bag. "This is evidence," she said, "and tomorrow morning I'm driving it to the county sheriff." The county sheriff, a man named Hollis Webb, who had held the office for 16 years and owed no favors to the coal company, drove out to Decker Hollow the next afternoon. He was a large, slow-moving man who listened more than he spoke and wrote everything down in a leather-bound pocket notebook with a pencil stub. He examined the springhouse. He interviewed Virgil Ambergy. He looked at the broken lye bottle, the splash pattern on the floor stones, and the footprints in the mud outside the door. He made no accusations and drew no conclusions aloud, but he spent 45 minutes at Dr. Pace's office on his way out of the hollow, and when he left, Dr. Pace's front curtains were drawn. 8 days later, 2 things arrived in Decker Hollow on the same morning. The first was the county water analysis report. The results were unambiguous. The springhouse water showed 0 bacterial contamination, 0 heavy metal content, 0 toxic mineral deposits. The mineral profile was consistent with a clean limestone aquifer. The water exceeded the county's standards for drinking water by a significant margin. The health officer, Greer, had handwritten a note at the bottom of the report. "This is among the cleanest natural water sources I have tested in 18 years of service." Ada pinned the report to the front door of the springhouse, where every family walking up the hollow road could read it. The second arrival was a black Ford sedan carrying two men in dark suits, investigators from the Kentucky State Board of Medical Examiners. They had come in response to Ada's letter, and they had brought with them the results of the chemical analysis of Dr. Pace's brown tonic. The tonic contained grain alcohol, sugar syrup, and mercurous chloride, calomel, in concentrations that the State Board's laboratory described as significantly exceeding any therapeutic dosage and consistent with chronic toxicity upon regular ingestion. In plain language, Dr. Pace had been selling poison and calling it medicine. The investigators spent 3 days in Decker Hollow. They examined Dr. Pace's office, his medicine cabinet, and his records. They interviewed every family that would speak to them. They photographed Ada Pressley's journal page by page, treating the 23-year-old document as a founding piece of evidence in what was becoming a very large case. The families of the Hollow, who had been buying Dr. Pace's medicines on trust for a generation, came forward one by one. They brought their bottles, the brown tonic, the white powder, the thick syrup. They described their symptoms. They described symptoms in family members who had taken the medicines for years. Beulah Combs brought a cigar box containing receipts for every purchase her family had made from Dr. Pace since 1925, nearly $300 in 18 years, for medicines that were making them sick. Old Virgil Ambergy sat on the springhouse wall and watched the investigators walk the hollow road, and he said something to Ada that she wrote down in her journal that night. "My wife took that brown tonic every day for 11 years for her headaches," Virgil said. "Her headaches never got better. Her teeth fell out, her hands shook, and every month I paid Dr. Pace another 50 cents for the medicine that was causing all of it. And the whole time, the cure was sitting in this springhouse. Clean water and honest herbs, and we were afraid to touch it because a liar told us it was poison." Dr. Eldon Pace, Jr. was stripped of his medical license by the State Board. The formal charges included compounding and dispensing toxic medications, practicing medicine with fraudulent claims, and maintaining a monopoly on medical care through deliberate suppression of alternative practitioners. The case file referenced Ada Pressley's journal as evidence that the pattern of abuse had begun with his father and continued for 23 years. Pace closed his office and left Decker Hollow in his automobile on a gray morning in November. He did not say goodbye to anyone. The family stood on their porches and watched him drive down the road, and not one of them waved. The Frontier Nursing Service, notified by Ada's original letter of introduction, assigned Decker Hollow a permanent midwife station. Ada was appointed station nurse. The county health board allocated funds to restore the springhouse as an official community water source, the first such designation in the county's history. But Ada did more than that. She turned the springhouse into what Cora had always intended it to be, a mountain pharmacy. She lined the stone shelves with medicines she made herself, using Cora's recipes and her own training, stored at the spring's constant cold temperature: willow bark tincture for pain, elderberry syrup for winter ailments, comfrey salve for the miners' cuts and bruises, wild cherry bark for the children's coughs, chamomile tea for the old people who couldn't sleep. She charged nothing. The mountain provided the herbs, the spring provided the cold. The knowledge had been passed from grandmother to mother to granddaughter, and it belonged to the hollow, not to any one person. Thomas Sismore and a crew of men from the hollow rebuilt the springhouse door and fitted it with a proper iron latch. They cleared the path from the road and laid flat stepping stones so the old folks could walk up without slipping. They built a wooden bench outside the door where families could sit and wait. Pearl Ambergy organized the women to plant a garden beside the springhouse, medicinal herbs in raised beds, the same species Cora had gathered from the wild mountainsides. Elderberry bushes along the stone wall, chamomile in the sunny patch by the creek, comfrey in the shade beneath the cliff. Within 2 summers, Ada was harvesting most of her medicines from the garden rather than foraging. Old Virgil Ambergy, who had saved the spring from the lie attack, appointed himself unofficial guardian of the springhouse. He sat on the stone wall every evening, carving wooden toys for the hollow children, watching the families come and go, and telling anyone who would listen about the night he heard glass breaking in the dark. On a warm evening the following spring, Ada sat on the bench outside the springhouse door, listening to the steady sound of the spring flowing through the stone trough inside. The hollow was quiet. Chimney smoke rose straight in the still air. A mother and child walked up the path, the child carrying a small jar to fill with cold spring water. Ada reached into her medical bag and pulled out Cora's leather journal. She opened it to the last page, the entry Cora had written the night before she left Decker Hollow in 1920. I am leaving because I cannot fight a man who poisons his patients and blames it on the water. I am leaving my medicines in the springhouse because the spring will keep them safe longer than I can. If anyone from my family ever comes back to this hollow, they will find what I left. The spring is clean. The herbs are true. The liar is the man with the medical bag. Ada closed the journal, held it against her chest, and watched the mother and child fill their jar with clean, cold water from the spring that had never been poisoned. If this story of Ada Pressley and the springhouse that was never poisoned kept you listening, leave a comment and tell us your favorite part. Have you ever discovered that something everyone feared was actually something valuable? Hit that subscribe button, share this with someone who loves mountain stories, and we'll see you next time in the Hollow.